Hi, Steve.
Hello, Rabbi.
Hi, John. Welcome.
Everybody. Hi, everybody.
Hope everyone's keeping warm.
Cold today. Ooh.
It's been cold in Cape Town the last few days.
That's for certain.
Yeah.
Easy.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. John. I'm going to share the screen and we'll start. It's Mazel Tov to everyone for completing the book of Haflah. Those laws relating all to the different vows and so on, commitments, verbal commitments, and we now move on to the book that's called Sefer Zraim, which literally translates the book of seeds, and we'll see that as it's got to do with laws relating to the agricultural laws mostly, and associated laws and gifts that are given from the land. So if you look on the page here as an introduction to the entire book, Rambam quotes the verse from Tehillim: "In the name of Hashem, God of the world, may your hand be ready to help me, for I've chosen your precepts." And we go into the seventh book, the book of seeds, and here we're going to deal generally with 7 areas of halacha. The first is the law of kilayim, which is mixtures or forbidden mixtures. Next, we'll learn about the laws of matnot aniyim, the gifts of the poor, trumot, Meiser Sheni, Bikurim, which is the gift of the first food, and the laws of Shemitah and Yovel, leaving the land to rest. Okay, so those are the major sections of halakha. And we begin first with the laws of kilayim. Kilayim, which is, as we'll learn, different forbidden mixtures. Generally speaking, there are 5 prohibitions. But in fact, as we'll see today, the first of those prohibitions we're going to deal with is manifest in more than one way. So in practice, it's actually more than one activity, but it's all learned from one verse and therefore one mitzvah. What are the 5 mitzvahs that are constituted within this particular section, the laws of kilayim? Not to plant different species of produce together, not to plant grain and vegetables in a vineyard. Okay, that's what we call kilei kerem, and it's going to have its own unique laws. Not to crossbreed different species of animals, not to work with 2 different species of animals together, and not to wear garments of a forbidden mixture of fabric, which we commonly refer to as shatnez. So all these mitzvahs are going to be explained in the coming chapters. Today, what we're going to see is that the first mitzvah of not planting different species together, which means different seeds. So what we're calling over here is actually the mixture of seeds in today's halacha, is actually going to include also the prohibition against grafting. So that first mitzvah is actually subdivided into more than one simple behavior. We'll see where and when it applies. And the end of the chapter will give us some general terms and rules that will help us understand the chapters going forward. Okay, it's a relatively short chapter, so we should be able to get through this in decent time. We begin with the first halacha. A person who sows 2 species of seeds together in Eretz Yisrael is liable for lashes. Obviously, lashes is the common punishment for someone who transgresses a biblical prohibition. So this is the point. The verse that reads, "You shall not sow your field with mixed species," is a direct prohibition. You can't take 2 types of different plants and mix those seeds and plant them together within the land of Israel. What we'll see emerges over here is that the forbidden mixtures that apply specifically to the land or within the land will apply, at least biblically for sure, only to the land of Israel and not outside the land of Israel. Other mixtures, which we're going to come across, like grafting, which we'll learn of today, and then we'll learn of also mixing animals and so on and so forth, will apply also outside. So whenever we have a mitzvah that's specific to the land per se, generally speaking, those mitzvot and the prohibitions associated are specific to the land of Israel. Sometimes, by rabbinic law, it will extend outside of the land of Israel as well, as we'll learn. But as we see here, specifically mixing seeds is a prohibition in the land of Israel. This prohibition refers to as kilayim, applies whether one sows, weeds, or covers seeds with earth. That means if you do anything to promote the growth of those seeds, you are transgressing. So if somebody else planted them, but you make sure to take care of that area and take out the weeds and so on, which will enable it to grow, you are transgressing. Or what is covering it? So he says, for example, there was a kernel of wheat and a kernel of barley or a fava bean and a lentil lying on the earth, and one covered them with earth. Whether with his hand, his foot, or with a utensil, he's liable for lashes. So even though you didn't place the seeds there, you covered it, which is going to promote its growth, you've transgressed. This applies whether he sows them in the earth or in a pot with a hole. Okay, again, because this is a mitzvah that is associated with the land, so a pot plant that has holes at the bottom that attach it to earth, it's also a prohibition. When by contrast, he sows them in a pot without a hole, and this again would still be, this is still within the land of Israel, he's liable only for lashes for rebellious conduct, meaning that it would be a rabbinical prohibition, not the actual biblical prohibition. Halacha Gimel, it's forbidden to plant kilayim for a Gentile. So you're not allowed to do that. It is, by contrast, permitted to tell a Gentile to sow mixed seeds, mixed species of seeds for his own sake. Okay, here there's a bit of discussion on some of the other codifiers, what exactly this refers to. But it seems clear that Rambam himself would hold that for a non-Jew to do this, although there are certain mitzvahs which we know how to tell a non-Jew to do on our behalf, in this case it would seem that you would be, according to the Rambam, allowed to tell a non-Jew to do that. It is forbidden for a person to maintain mixed species of seeds in his field. Instead, he must uproot them. If he maintains them, in other words, he doesn't do anything, if he lets them grow, he's not liable for lashes. And the reason is because there's no action that he's being transgressing. There's no proactive transgression. It is permitted for a Jew to sow mixed species of seeds by hand in the diaspora. Okay, so you said that clearly. This prohibition is not something that applies outside the land of Israel. It is even permitted to mix seeds at the outset and then sow them. These concepts are being communicated by the old tradition, again, which highlights this idea that this particular prohibition is a prohibition associated with the land of Israel. Now, the prohibition against mixed species of seeds involves only plants that are fit for human consumption. Grasses that are bitter and similar roots that are fit only for medicinal purposes and the like are not included in the prohibition against mixtures of seeds. Again, this would also only be within the land of Israel, because outside the land of Israel it's not a problem. Now, there's much discussion amongst other commentators. What would be with, we're talking about so-called food fit for human consumption. Think about the type of foods, grains that we would eat, or vegetables or seeds that we plant for human consumption. And then it speaks about things that are generally not used for consumption, but you might grow them for other purposes, such as medicinal. But what about the in-between types of grains that you might be planting for your animals, but technically could also feed a human being? So there's discussion in the commentators whether or not this would be included. Halacha 5. Now this is where it gets interesting and expands the application of this mitzvah. Because although the verse says not to plant seeds, grafting a mixture of trees is included in this prohibition. In the prohibition, you shall not sow your fields with a mixed species. What's implied? When a person grafts a tree of one species onto another tree, for example, he grafted a branch of an apple tree to an etrog tree, or from an etrog tree onto an apple tree, he is liable for lashes according to scriptural law in any place, right? Whether in the land of Israel or in the diaspora. Similarly, if a person grafts a vegetable to a tree, or a tree to a vegetable, is liable for lashes in every place. Again, because this is a grafting that's taking place above land. So those learned from the same pasuk, but because it's something that's not associated with the land of Israel, the mixture is prohibited outside the land of Israel as well. It's forbidden to a Jew to allow a Gentile to graft different species of tree together for a Jew. So this is the second difference. When it comes to grafting, when it came to planting, we said that a non-Jew can do it on your behalf. When it comes to grafting, because it's not something that's particular to the land, that prohibition would extend to a non-Jew as well. It is permitted to sow the seeds of produce and the seeds of a tree together. Okay, so it's in other words, we'll see the difference. In other words, certain things grow directly from the seed out of the ground. Other things will first grow a tree, and then the tree will produce. So those things he's saying, that technically can be mixed. Obviously, you would only be able to, you would have the seeds for a tree, you would only be able to mix in one other type of seed. Because if you mixed in more than one, then you would automatically have a forbidden mixture, right? So he's just saying that technically, if you mixed in, wheat kernels into where you're planting apple seeds, that wouldn't be a transgression of the prohibition. Similarly, it is permitted to mix seeds from different species of trees and sow them together. That's not a problem. the rationale is that the only prohibition against mixed species of seeds that apply to trees is the prohibition against grafting, as opposed to seeds which you can't mix. And we'll see a little bit of a definition of that soon as well. Halacha 7, although he's liable for lashes, when a person sows forbidden species together or grafts forbidden species of trees together, this is an important point. The produce that grows is permitted to be eaten, even by the person who transgressed and sowed it. For it is only the sowing that is forbidden. It is permitted to plant a branch from the grafted tree or plant the seeds from a vegetable that was planted together with mixed species. So this is very important. Maybe you can even offhand, and we can think of an example of some quite common fruit that are actually hybrid fruit that come from a grafting of two different species that we commonly eat and replant. An example would be a nectarine, right? So because although initially that would have been prohibited to graft those trees, but once we've produced it, and once you got seeds from that, and once you got branches from that, you can replant it and you can enjoy the fruit of those plantings. Okay, so now the last two halachot, we've got halacha 8 and 9, is going to give us, it's almost like rules, it's going to give us titles and categories that are going to assist us in understanding the upcoming halachot. He says like this: edible plants are divided into 3 categories. What I mean, edible plants means as opposed to trees. Those things that the seed itself grows into the food that you're going to eat. Okay, so what are the 3 types of seed to food seeds? The first is called grain, okay, which would include wheat, wild wheat, or some would translate that as rye, barley, oats, and spelt. The 5 main type of grains that we refer to, tuah, in the halachic terminology, or the biblical terminology. The second type are called kitniot, also a term we're familiar with. These are legumes, right? It includes all types of seeds eaten by men other than grain. For example, beans, peas, lentils, millet, rice, sesame seeds, poppy seeds, white peas, and the like. And third category is called garden seeds. What are those? Those are seeds which are not the seed themselves we don't eat. In other words, by legumes, it's basically the expanded seed that you're eating itself, right? And here we're talking about a seed that you wouldn't eat the seed, but the seed itself is transformed into the food or the vegetable. So example, onion seeds, garlic seeds, leek seeds, ketzach, which is a type of herbs, cabbage seeds, and the like. So all of these are referred to as garden seeds. And we need to keep these terms in mind. Flaxseed is considered in this category. Flaxseed is different because flax is not planted to eat it. It's planted, which the produce is then used, transformed into material, but it still would be considered part of this. So all of these you wouldn't be able to mix together. That's the point, right? When these seeds are sown and grow, before the seeds are recognizable, the entire plant is called herbage, and the fruit itself is called vegetable. This is important. So when in the halachot going forward, we want to refer to all of these things will be referred to as seeds, and the produce is referred to as yerek. So in the coming chapters, when the Rambam will refer to yerek as vegetable, it might include what we sometimes would call grain independently. Okay, so that's really what he's setting up here in this halakha. And the final halakha in today's chapter, yesh mizrayoni, there are some garden plants that are sown in large fields. Okay, he says there are certain types of plants which it's common that you will seed the whole field with this produce. So for example, flax and mustard seed. And they are called types of seeds. Okay, we'll refer to this as minei zra'im in the coming chapters. And there are other garden plants which people customarily sow only in small rows. For example, turnips, radishes, spinach, onions, coriander, parsley, horseradish, and the like. And these are referred to as minei yirakot, types of vegetables. Okay, so that concludes the first short chapter of the new book and a new set of halachot.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay, shukach, everyone, nice to see you all.
Thank you.
Stay safe, and
Rabbi?
only share good news. Yes.
Rabbi?
Yes.
So this prohibition of mixing seeds falls under it would be a hook, right?
Yeah.
But
Yes. You say
rational,
a mitzvah
there's
that
no
defies
rational
logic.
explanation. No.
Yes, kilayim is one of those mitzvahs that defy our human logic. Yes. Although
Right.
different ideas are ascribed to it and given to it, but yes.
Rabbi,
Okay.
in regard, how do nuts fall into this, especially ground nuts?
What do you mean? Oh, ground nuts. I think nuts are ground nuts, are they not? I don't know. I'm not sure actually.
I think they
Maybe you
can
can share with
might,
us. What's that,
they
David?
might be kidneyot.
So only peanuts are considered kidneyot, right?
That groundnuts are peanuts.
Yes. So there you go. So peanuts are kidneyot. That's yes. And I imagine other nuts are like other. Fruit maybe. I don't know. I would guess. Yeah. So I don't want to say definitely, but that would be my guess. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah,
What we're
almonds.
going to see is just at a point, because just so that it doesn't get confusion a bit later. When we've spoken about the allowance of mixing seeds, there's going to be special laws when it comes to what's called kilaya keren, mixing other produce. As we saw, it's a standalone mitzvah at the top here, which is into a vineyard. Okay, just keep that in mind so you don't get confused when we learn laws that almost sound like they contradict what we learned here. Okay, the different categories. It's important to remember difference between trees and what he called over here the general seeds of the